She had no idea the phone was recording. Jaylin, a black woman who had spent 3 years building a life with nothing but her own hands, her own strength, and a love she had taught herself to stop talking about, had fallen asleep on her sofa after a double shift at the hospital. Exhausted. Alone. The way she had been alone every night for 37 months. And while she slept, her twin sons crept into the living room and said the things that no one in that family had ever been brave enough to say out loud. They talked about the black car parked outside their building, the one their mother thought belonged to a neighbor. They talked about a man in a black suit spotted across a mall corridor, with dragon tattoos crawling up his neck, and eyes that found his son's face and then disappeared before anyone else could see. They talked about a Korean mafia boss, one of the most powerful and feared men in Atlanta, who had walked away from the woman he loved because he believed leaving was the only way to keep her safe. And they talked about their mother, who had closed every door, carried every weight, and worn her strength like armor for 3 years, while that same man quietly made sure nothing in the world ever touched her. Neither of them knew she was listening. Neither of them knew the phone was recording every single word. But what happened when Jaylin woke up and pressed play, and what she did with what she heard, changed everything that came after. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that no medical school prepares you for. It is not the exhaustion of 12-hour shifts or double rounds in an ICU, where the machines never stop beeping and the fluorescent lights never dim. It is the exhaustion of carrying something heavy inside your chest for so long that you forget it was ever light. Jaylin Monique Brooks knew that exhaustion the way she knew the layout of her apartment in complete darkness. By feel, by habit, by the memory of something that used to be different. She was 32 years old, and she moved through the world with the quiet precision of someone who had learned, at great personal cost, that needing people out loud was a luxury she could no longer afford. She clocked out at 11:47 on a Friday night, and the Atlanta air hit her face like something that hadn't decided yet whether it was warm or cold. She pulled her bag higher on her shoulder, the black one, fake leather, soft at the handles from years of use, the little sunflower keychain swinging against her hip. And she walked to her car without looking left or right, because she had stopped expecting anything from the periphery a long time ago. The apartment was quiet when she arrived. She always checked the boys first. She always would. Noah and Eli slept in the way that only children who are genuinely safe can sleep. Sprawled and open, one arm flung out, one knee bent sideways, mouths slightly apart. Noah had kicked his blanket to the floor again. She picked it up without a sound and tucked it around his shoulders. And she stood there for a moment longer than she needed to, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. He had his father's jawline already. Even at 9 years old, that bone structure was already declaring itself, already telling a story she had tried very hard not to keep telling herself. She did not linger. She had learned that lingering in doorways only led to thoughts she had no business having at midnight when she had work again in less than 9 hours. The sofa received her like something patient and indifferent. She reached for the remote, reached for her phone, and in that precise moment of letting herself go soft for just 1 second, that 1 second where the armor comes off because there is simply no energy left to hold it up, her eyes closed. The phone was still in her hand. She had not meant to sleep. She never meant to sleep there. But the body does not negotiate with intention when it has been running on nothing but routine and quiet grief for 3 years. What she did not notice, because she was already gone, was that her thumb had grazed the edge of the screen as it fell. The microphone icon. The little red circle that appears and blinks slowly, like a heartbeat that doesn't know it's being ignored. The phone was recording. Now, here is what you need to understand about the Brooks apartment on that particular Friday night. It was a home that had been built with extraordinary care by a woman working with very limited resources and an iron determination that her children would feel, in every room, that they were loved and that they were safe. The couch was old, but the throw pillows were bright. The walls had drawings from school taped at eye level, the boys' eye level, not hers. The kitchen always smelled faintly of something warm, even when nothing had been cooked recently, because Jalen burned a vanilla candle on Sunday nights, and the scent held all week like a promise she renewed every 7 days. It was a home that said, "We are fine here. We are enough here." And for 2 years and some months, that had been mostly true. But children are not decorative. Children are not props arranged neatly in the background of a mother's survival story. Children watch. Children catalog. Children carry information in their small hands, and they do not always know what to do with it. So they hold it, and they weigh it, and they turn it over in the dark when they cannot sleep, which is more often than their mother would want to know. Noah had been holding something for 7 days. He appeared first at the doorway of the living room, padding in on socked feet, and he stood very still for a long moment, looking at his mother's face. Her head had tipped slightly to the side. Her lips were parted. The cordal dorado, the thin gold chain she never took off, the one with the small crescent moon pendant, had shifted and caught the light from the television. He had asked her once where that necklace came from. She had said simply, "Someone who mattered." And then she had moved on to a different subject so smoothly and so completely that he had understood, even at his age, that the follow-up question was a door he was not supposed to open. He turned back to the hallway and made a sound that was not quite a whistle, more of a breath pushed through teeth. And Ailey appeared beside him 30 seconds later, 1 foot bare because he had lost the socks somewhere between the bed and the hallway. They stood together in the width of that doorway, shoulders almost touching, and they shared the look. The look that had no translation in any spoken language because it had developed entirely between the two of them, in the private territory of being the same person split across 2 bodies. It said, "She's really asleep." And it said, "How long do we have?" And it said, "Are you ready to talk about this?" Ailey gave a small nod. They moved to the center of the room and lowered themselves to the rug, cross-legged and close, like they were about to negotiate something important, which, in their understanding, they absolutely were. "Ailey?" Noah's voice was the quieter of the two by nature, lower, more contained, the kind of voice that makes people lean in. "I need to tell you something about Dad." The word landed in the room the way words like that always land when they are spoken in the dark, in a quiet house, by a child who has been carrying them alone. It did not echo. It absorbed. Ailey's eyes went wide, and then immediately careful, because he was the more emotional of the two, and he already knew, from the specific gravity of Noah's voice, that this was not small. "What about him?" he whispered. Noah picked at a loose thread on the rug. It was a gesture he had inherited without knowing it from a woman who picked at the sleeve of her scrubs when she was working up to saying something difficult. Last week, Noah began. When we were at the mall, you and Mom were by the fountain and I went to the bathroom. Yeah, on the way back. He paused. He had rehearsed this. He had rehearsed it every night for 7 days, and it still felt like stepping off something high. I saw Dad. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. Eli sat very still inside it. Noah. He was across the corridor, by the shoe store. He was just standing there, and he was looking at me. Noah's jaw tightened slightly. He was wearing a black suit. You could see the tattoos on his neck. And he looked at me, Eli. He looked right at me. And I almost called out. I almost said something. But he put his finger to his lips. Like, don't. And then he just turned and walked away. Gone. Eli opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. That was a week ago, he said, and his voice came out slightly broken at the edges. You've been sitting on that for a whole week? I didn't know what to do with it. You tell me. That's what you do with it. You tell me. We're the same. Keep your voice down. Noah glanced at the sofa. Jalen had not moved. I didn't tell you because I knew what you'd do. You'd tell Mom. And I wasn't ready for what that would do to her. Eli went quiet. Because that was fair. That was exactly what he would have done. There's more, Noah said. And he said it so flatly, so without drama, that it was somehow more frightening than if he had cried. Eli pulled his bare foot under his knee and waited. You know the black car? The one that parks outside sometimes? The one Mom thinks is one of the neighbors from the building down the street. The Escalade. Yeah. Noah finally looked up. His eyes were steady in the way that his father's eyes were steady. The kind of steady that is not the absence of feeling, but the absolute control of it. I heard the man inside. I was coming back from Marcus's place and I cut through the side of the parking strip. He had the window down a little. He was on the phone, and he said... Noah stopped. Swallowed. He said, Guisin's orders. Just verify they're safe. Don't be seen. The crescent moon pendant caught the television light again and threw a small gold curve across the ceiling. Neither boy looked at it, but both of them knew. Guisin. Eli had heard that word exactly twice before in his life, and both times it had come from places that were not meant for his ears. The first time he was 6 years old and had woken up in the middle of the night to get water, and he had found his mother sitting at the kitchen table with her phone face down in front of her, and her hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. She was not crying. She was doing something that he later understood was harder than crying. She was sitting completely still, with an expression that had no name in the vocabulary of a 6-year-old. And she was saying the word under her breath, the way people say the names of things they have lost. Not calling out, not expecting an answer, just confirming quietly that the thing had been real. He had gone back to bed without the water and had not told Noah until 3 days later, because some things needed to be processed alone first, even between twins. The second time was at school. A Korean boy 2 grades above them, the son of a restaurant owner in their district, had said it to a friend across the lunch table, not knowing that Eli was close enough to hear. He had said it the way older kids say things they find impressive and slightly frightening. Guisin. The ghost. That's what they call him in Seoul. My uncle says nobody has ever seen him make a mistake. And then the conversation had moved on, the way conversations at lunch tables do, careless and fast, while Eli had sat very still with his tray in front of him and felt something rearrange itself quietly in his chest. He had not told Noah that one at all. So now, sitting on the living room rug at nearly midnight with his mother sleeping 3 feet away and the television casting its pale shifting light across everything, Eli looked at his brother, and he felt the full weight of what they were actually discussing settle onto his shoulders like something physical. Their father was not a man who had simply left. Their father was a man who had left and then positioned himself just close enough to make sure nothing bad ever reached them. There is something uniquely devastating about understanding, as a child, that the adult who was supposed to stay had genuinely believed that leaving was the more loving choice. It does not arrive as a clean revelation. It arrives in pieces, slowly, like a photograph developing in a dark room. Shapes first, then shadows, then finally the face you were not entirely sure you wanted to see this clearly. Noah watched his brother process it. He knew Eli's face the way he knew his own, which meant he knew exactly where the emotion was building and exactly how long it would take before it needed somewhere to go. It took 43 seconds. "He's been watching over us," Eli said, and his voice was not quite steady. "This whole time. 3 years. He never actually." He stopped, pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment. "Noah, why didn't he just come back?" "Because of Mom." "What do you mean, because of Mom? Mom loves him. Mom has always—" "Eli." Noah said it gently, but with a finality that was startling in someone his age. "You know how Mom is. You know what she does when something hurts her. She doesn't run from it. She just closes the door. And she smiles. And she keeps going. And she never talks about it again." He paused. "Dad knows that too. And I think he decided that she had closed the door, and that him showing up and knocking would only make things worse." "But the door's not closed," Eli said. He said it with absolute certainty, the kind of certainty that children have about their parents that parents rarely have about themselves. "The door's not closed, Noah. You've seen her. When she thinks we're not looking. When a song comes on the radio and she turns it off too fast. When she looks at us and her face does that thing where she smiles but her eyes go somewhere else for a second." Noah was quiet. "She still loves him," Eli said. "She loves him and she thinks he's gone, and he loves her, and he thinks she's moved on, and they're both just sitting in it, by themselves, for 3 years. I know. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard in my life. I know, Eli. We have to do something. I know." They sat with that for a moment. The television continued its indifferent flickering. Somewhere outside, a car moved slowly down the street. Neither of them looked toward the window, but both of them thought, in the same instant, about the black Escalade, and about the man inside it who reported back to a man in a high-rise office who had apparently spent 3 years making sure his family was safe from a distance that was slowly killing him. "What do we do?" Eli asked. "We can't just tell Mom. You know what she'll do. She'll pull that face, the nurse face, and she'll say, 'Boys, your father made his choices.' and she'll make us dinner, and she'll put us to bed, and then she'll go sit in the kitchen alone. Noah almost smiled, because that was exactly right. Devastatingly, precisely right. We don't tell Mom, Noah said. We tell Dad. Eli blinked. We don't have his number. No. Noah looked toward the sofa, toward the phone resting near their mother's hand. Screen dim now, but not dark. But Mom does? The silence that followed was the particular silence of two people who have just arrived at a decision that they know is irreversible. It had a weight to it. It had a texture. It was the silence before something begins, and both of them felt it in their stomachs the way you feel the first drop of a roller coaster. The moment where going back becomes physically impossible. The contact, Noah said quietly. The one saved as just a heart. The black one. Eli had seen it too. Months ago, when he had borrowed his mother's phone to look something up for a school project, and he had accidentally opened the Contacts app and scrolled past it before his brain caught up with his eyes. He had not mentioned it, but he had not forgotten it either. She'll know it was us, Eli said. Yes. She'll be upset. Probably. And then what? Even if he comes, what if she shuts the door anyway? What if she sees him and she just closes? Noah looked at his brother for a long moment, and then he said something that was far too old for his face, far too settled for someone who still slept with a stuffed animal tucked behind his pillow where no one could see it. Then at least she closes it while he's standing in front of her. At least it's real. At least she has to look at him when she does it. And maybe... He stopped. His voice did something small and complicated. Maybe she won't. Eli wiped his eyes with the back of his wrist. He did not apologize for it. He never did. Okay, he said. Okay, Noah agreed. They did not move immediately. They sat for another few minutes in the shifting television light. Two 9-year-old boys with their father's bone structure and their mother's stubbornness, sitting at the precise intersection of two people's unfinished love story and deciding, with the full authority of children who have nothing to lose, to do something about it. It was Eli who eventually reached out. It was always Eli who moved first, once the decision was made. Noah was the architect, but Eli was the one who picked up the tools. He leaned carefully across the cushion, slow and deliberate, watching his mother's face the entire time. She did not stir. The crescent moon pendant caught light one more time and threw its small gold curve across her collarbone. Eli lifted the phone. He navigated with the specific confidence of a child of his generation, quiet and fast. Contacts. The black heart. He looked at Noah once. Noah gave a single small nod. The message was brief. They had not planned what to write, and somehow that made it more honest. 3 words, typed in Eli's uneven but determined handwriting, autocorrect fixing the capitalization without being asked. The boys need you. He pressed send before he could think about it too hard. The phone went back beside his mother's hand, softer than a breath. They retreated to their room. They lay in their beds in the dark, not sleeping, staring at the ceiling, listening to the apartment breathe around them. At some point, Eli whispered across the gap between their beds. Do you think he'll come? Noah stared at the ceiling. He thought about a man in a black suit standing across a mall corridor, making eye contact with his son and pressing one finger to his lips. Not hiding, not running, just waiting. Still. like a man who has taught himself to be patient with a pain that he does not believe he has the right to complain about. "Yeah," Noah said. "I think he'll come." Outside on the street below, the black Escalade sat in its usual position. The man inside had not received any unusual communications. He did not know yet what had been sent. He was simply doing what he had been paid to do for 37 months without a single night off. Watching a window on the 4th floor that showed the blue flicker of a television that had been left on, and waiting for the light to go out so he could confirm that everything was still safe and call it in. He would call it in at 12:42. Kang Joon-ho would receive the report at 12:44. Same as every night, same as always. But tonight, 40 seconds before that call came through, something else would arrive on his phone first. 3 words. And the world, for him, would quietly stop. The office on the 12th floor of the Kang Global Investments building did not look like what people imagined when they imagined the workspace of a man like Joon-ho. There were no weapons mounted on walls, no obvious displays of power, no dramatic lighting designed to intimidate. It was, in fact, a remarkably quiet room. Dark wood, clean lines, a single lamp burning amber on the corner of the desk, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the Atlanta skyline that at this hour looked like scattered embers that had forgotten to go out. There were books. Real ones, red ones, with broken spines and pages that had been turned too fast in the middle of the night. There was a photograph on the desk that faced away from the door and toward the chair where he sat, so that it was visible only to him and to no one else who ever entered that room. Kang Joon-ho was not a man who explained himself. He was 38 years old, and he had built something from nothing. Or, more precisely, he had inherited something broken and rebuilt it into something formidable, which is a different kind of achievement and a heavier one, because it means that the blood was already on the foundation before you ever laid your first stone. He ran his operation the way a surgeon operates, with absolute precision, minimal movement, and the complete suppression of anything that might cause his hand to tremble at the wrong moment. His men respected him with the particular quality of respect that sits adjacent to fear without ever quite touching it. He was not cruel. He was simply a man who had never once in his professional life made a decision based on what he wanted as opposed to what was necessary. This discipline had cost him the only thing he had ever genuinely wanted. He knew that. He had always known that. He had made the calculation 3 years ago with the same cold clarity he applied to everything, and he had arrived at the conclusion that Jalen Brooks and 2 infant boys were safer in a world where Kang Joon-ho was a memory than in one where he was a presence. There were people who wanted to reach him through whatever he loved. That was simply the arithmetic of the life he lived. And he had looked at those 2 small faces, Noah first, then Eli, both of them so new to the world that they still moved with that uncoordinated animal softness of the very recently born. And he had understood with a certainty that bypassed thought entirely and went straight to the bone, that he would burn every single thing he had built before he let that world touch them. So he had gone. He had told himself it was clean. He had told himself that Jalen was strong, and she was. God, she was the strongest person he had ever stood next to. And that she would build something without him. He had told himself that the boys would be fine, that they were young enough that his absence would become simply the natural condition of their lives, rather than a wound with a specific shape. He had been wrong about that last part. He knew it now. He had probably known it within 6 months, but by then the machinery of his absence was already running, and he did not know how to stop it without destroying the thing he had built it to protect. So instead, he had done the thing that did not make sense on paper, but made complete sense to the part of him that had never fully accepted the decision he had made. He had placed people. Quietly. Carefully. One car on the street that changed shifts every 8 hours. A contact inside the hospital who reported nothing specific, only whether she had arrived, whether she had left, whether everything appeared normal. A man who walked past the boys' school twice a day at pickup and drop-off and sent a single-word confirmation. Clear. He told himself this was protocol. He told himself it was simply risk management, that they were connected to him whether he was present or not, and therefore required a baseline level of protection. He told himself a great number of things in that 12th floor office while the amber lamp burned and the Atlanta skyline glittered indifferently outside his window. The photograph on his desk faced only him. It was not a professional photograph. It was the kind of photograph that gets taken without intention on an ordinary afternoon. Jalen laughing at something off camera, head tilted back slightly, the gold chain catching light at her collarbone, one hand raised mid-gesture. She did not know the photo was being taken. That was why it was the one he kept. Because it was the only image he had of her that was entirely unguarded, entirely real, entirely the version of her that existed when she was not performing strength for anyone. He had looked at that photograph every night for 3 years. He was looking at it when his phone moved on the desk. He registered it peripherally at first, the slight vibration, the screen illuminating, and he did not reach for it immediately because at 12:40-something on a Friday night, the communications he received were operational, and operational communications could wait 30 seconds while he finished the thought he was in the middle of. But then something made him look. Some instinct that had nothing to do with professional habit and everything to do with the number that was displayed on the screen. A number he had never deleted, never reclassified, never moved from the position it had always held at the very top of his most contacted list, even though it had been silent for 37 months. He picked up the phone. He read the message. "The boys need you." 3 words. That was all. And Kang Jun-ho, who had sat across tables from men who wanted him dead and had not let a single muscle in his face respond, who had received news of betrayals and losses and the collapse of carefully constructed plans without allowing his expression to shift by a single degree. Kang Jun-ho sat in his 12th floor office and went completely still in a way that was different from his usual stillness. His usual stillness was controlled. This was the stillness of a man whose entire internal architecture had just been struck by something it had not braced for. 40 seconds passed. His head of security, a broad-shouldered man named Park, who had been with him for 9 years and who had learned to read the temperature of any room Jun-ho occupied with the sensitivity of a barometer, looked up from his position near the door. He said nothing. He simply watched. And what he saw in those 40 seconds was something he would later describe, to exactly no one, as the only time in 9 years that he had seen his employer look like a human being who was in pain, rather than a man who had processed pain into something useful. Jun-ho set the phone down on the desk. He looked at the Atlanta skyline. He looked at the photograph. He picked the phone back up. "Park." "Sir?" "Prepare the car." Park did not ask questions. That was part of why he had lasted 9 years. "Now, sir?" "Now." He stood. He buttoned the second button of his shirt, not the first, that one he left, and he straightened the jacket, and he looked at the room the way a man looks at a room he is not sure he will return to in the same state of mind. He pocketed the phone. He left the photograph where it was, facing the empty chair, which felt, in some way he could not have articulated, like leaving a light on. In the elevator going down, Park watched him from the corner of his eye and said nothing. In the car moving through the Atlanta streets at 1 a.m, Junho sat in the back with his hands resting on his knees and his eyes on the window and the city moving past him like something being slowly revealed. He was not rehearsing what he would say. He had learned, over the course of his life, that rehearsed words almost never survived contact with the actual moment they were prepared for. He was simply sitting with the fact of what was happening, which was that after 37 months of making the careful, correct, strategic decision every single day, 3 words from a number he had never stopped loving had undone all of it in the time it takes to draw a breath. He thought about his sons. He thought about Noah, who he had watched from across a mall corridor 7 days ago, and the moment their eyes had met had been the closest thing to absolution he had felt in 3 years, and also the closest thing to agony, because the boy had looked at him with recognition and steadiness, and not a single trace of anger. And somehow, that was worse than anger would have been. He thought about Eli, who he knew from the reports, always moving, always feeling everything at full volume, always the first one to react and the last one to pretend he hadn't. He thought about a woman asleep on a sofa with a phone in her hand and a gold chain at her throat, and 3 years of quiet survival accumulated around her like something built to last. The car turned onto her street. He saw the Escalade parked in its position, and the driver straightened instinctively at the sight of the approaching vehicle, then relaxed when he recognized it. Junho did not look at him. He was looking at the window on the 4th floor. The television light was gone now. The apartment was dark, but there was a lamp on somewhere, small and warm, visible only as a faint gold edge at the corner of the window. And he sat with that for a moment, that small gold light, before the car stopped and Park opened the door and the Atlanta night air came in cool and unhurried. He stepped out. He stood on the sidewalk looking up at the building. And Kang Junho, who had never in his professional life made a decision based on what he wanted, began to walk toward the door. The elevator in Jalen's building was the kind that made a sound between floors, a low, mechanical sigh, like something old reminding you that it was still working, but only just. Junho rode it to the 4th floor alone because he had told Park to stay with the car, and Park had looked at him with the expression of a man who understood that some things cannot be accompanied, and had nodded once and stepped back. The elevator sighed. The floors passed, and Junho stood in the small mirrored box and looked at his own reflection with the detached clarity of someone who has not seen himself honestly in a very long time. He looked like what he was. That had always been true. The tattoos at his neck, the weight of the rings on his fingers, the particular way his shoulders held themselves, all of it broadcast something that most people received as a warning. He had never minded that. Warnings kept people at a useful distance. But standing in this elevator, in this building, on his way to a door he had no right to knock on, he was suddenly and acutely aware that the thing being broadcast was the wrong thing entirely. That the man in the mirror was dressed for a world that had no place here, in this hallway that smelled faintly of someone's late dinner and clean laundry and the specific domestic warmth of a building full of people who simply lived their lives. The elevator opened. He walked the hallway slowly. Apartment 4F was at the end. He had known the number for 3 years without ever having stood in front of it, which was a particular kind of knowledge, the kind that lives in you like a coordinate you have never used, but cannot bring yourself to delete. He stopped in front of the door. He raised his hand. And here is the thing about Kang Junho that his men did not know and his enemies could not have imagined. He stood there for almost 2 full minutes before he knocked. Not from hesitation in the strategic sense, not calculating outcomes or preparing contingencies. He stood there because on the other side of that door was the only situation in his adult life where he had absolutely no idea what he was doing. And that feeling was so unfamiliar and so enormous that it required 2 minutes simply to breathe through it. He knocked 3 times. Quiet, but deliberate. Inside the apartment, Jaylene was not asleep. She had woken 40 minutes earlier with the phone in her hand and a crick in her neck, and the television throwing blue light at a ceiling she had stared at for a full 10 seconds before she remembered where she was and who she was and what day it was. She had sat up. She had rubbed the back of her neck. She had looked at the phone with the vague intention of checking the time, and instead had seen the recording notification glowing at her like something that knew it was going to change things. She had listened to the whole thing. 1 hour, 14 minutes, and 33 seconds of ambient sound, and then 2 boys on a living room rug talking about their father with the kind of honesty that only exists when people believe no one is listening. She had sat through all of it without moving, without making a sound. The nurse in her, the part that had learned to absorb devastating information with her face composed and her hands still, kept her upright through most of it. But when Noah said, "They're both just sitting in it, by themselves," for 3 years, she had pressed her hand flat against her sternum like she was checking for something. Like she needed confirmation that what she was feeling was real, and not just the particular cruelty of a dream that knew exactly where to press. She had not cried. She had done something quieter and more total than crying. She had simply sat with the truth of it, that her 9-year-old sons had seen through 3 years of her most careful performance and had found, underneath all of it, exactly what she had worked so hard to make invisible. She was standing in the kitchen with a glass of water she had not drunk when the knock came. She set the glass down. She walked to the door. She did not check the peephole. She would not be able to explain afterward why she didn't. Perhaps some part of her already knew. The part that had been quietly knowing things for 3 years and filing them under feelings she was not going to act on. Perhaps the recording had loosened something that had been held very tightly for a very long time. Whatever the reason, her hand went to the latch, and she turned it, and she opened the door, and the hallway light fell across the face of Kang Joon-ho, and she stood absolutely still. He looked exactly like himself. That was the first thing. She had spent considerable energy over 37 months trying to blur him in her memory, to let the specific details soften the way details do when you stop refreshing them. It had not worked particularly well, but she had told herself it had. She understood now, looking at him, that what she had actually done was memorize him so thoroughly that 3 years of distance had not moved a single line. The tattoo at his neck, the scar above his left eyebrow, the rings, the way he held himself like a man who has learned to take up exactly the space he intends to take up, and not 1 inch more. His eyes, though. His eyes were different. She had never seen him look like this. In all the time she had known him, through everything they had been through together, through the arguments and the tenderness and the impossible conversations and the moments of such complete closeness that she had felt, for the first time in her life, that being known by another person was not something to be afraid of. She had never seen him wear his face this openly. He looked like a man who had left all his armor in the car. He opened his mouth. "I know I have no right to be here," he said. His voice was the same, lower than you expected from the way he looked. Careful. She had always thought his voice sounded like someone choosing every word with both hands. She did not respond immediately. She looked at him. And then, without fully deciding to, she raised the phone that was still in her hand. She had carried it from the kitchen without noticing. And she pressed play on the recording, and Noah's voice came out into the hallway between them. Dad never really left. He just left Mom's sight. The words hung in the air. Junho's jaw tightened. His eyes dropped for a moment to the floor and then came back up to her face. And what was in them when they came back up was something she recognized from a long time ago. From the version of him that existed before the world they lived in had required him to become unreachable. Junho? Her voice was steady. She had a very good voice for steadiness. Did you have someone watching us? A pause. Brief, but honest. Yes. For how long? Since the week I left. She absorbed that. She looked at the crescent moon pendant resting against her collarbone. She didn't know she was touching it. Her fingers had found it without instruction. And she breathed. I saw you, she said. At the mall. I didn't say anything before because I thought I was wrong. I thought my mind was... She stopped. Noah saw you too. I know. His voice dropped slightly. I didn't handle that well. No, you didn't. Another silence, and then, from behind her, the sound of small feet. Noah and Eli appeared in the hallway of the apartment, side by side, pajamas rumpled, hair catastrophic, wearing the expressions of two people who have set something in motion and are now watching it arrive and are not entirely sure whether to be proud or terrified. They stood very still, shoulders touching, and looked at their father. Junho looked at his sons. Something moved across his face that he did not try to control. It was the first uncontrolled thing Jalen had ever seen on him, and it undid her in a way that all the steadiness in the world could not have prepared her for. His eyes went bright. His jaw worked once. He pressed his lips together and breathed through his nose, and the single tear that escaped down his left cheek was so contained, so solitary, so completely representative of a man who had forgotten how to let himself fall apart, that Jalen felt it land somewhere inside her chest with a weight that was disproportionate to its size. Eli pointed at his brother immediately. It was Noah's idea, he said. Noah looked at the ceiling. And Jalen laughed. It came from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. That laugh, the real one. The one that lived below all the competence and all the armor and all the carefully maintained okayness of the last 3 years. It rose through her like something that had been waiting a very long time for permission. And it was not a small laugh or a polite one. It was the laugh of a woman who had just had 3 years of careful grief interrupted by her 9-year-old son immediately deflecting blame at 1 a.m, and her body had decided, without consulting her, that this was the appropriate response to all of it. She stepped back from the door. She did not say, "Come in." She did not make a speech. She did not lay down conditions or ask the questions that would need to be asked. And there were many, and they would need real answers. And that conversation was going to be long and difficult and necessary, and neither of them was going to get through it without cost. She knew that. He knew that. None of that had changed. But she stepped back from the door. And that was enough. Junho crossed the threshold. The boys descended on him before he had taken 2 steps inside. Eli first, predictably, throwing himself forward with the complete physical commitment of a child who has never learned to hold back. Arms around the middle, face pressed against the black jacket. Noah came a half-second later, quieter, more deliberate, but just as total. Junho went down to one knee on the living room floor and put both arms around his sons and held them with the specific desperation of a man who has been careful for 3 years and is no longer going to be. Jaylin stood by the door she had just opened and watched the 3 of them on the floor of her living room. And she touched the crescent moon pendant at her throat, and she did not look away. The small lamp in the corner burned its warm gold. Outside on the street, the black Escalade remained in its position. The driver received no communication that night instructing him to move on. He stayed until morning, same as always, watching the building the way he had been told to watch it. But tonight there was a second car parked behind him, and he knew whose it was. And for the first time in 37 months, he understood that he was not the only one watching over this particular address anymore. The boys fell asleep on the living room rug eventually, tangled together the way they had slept since before they were born. Noah with one arm thrown over his brother, Eli with his bare foot sticking out from under the blanket Junho had pulled from the couch and laid over them both without waking them. Junho sat on the floor with his back against the sofa. Jaylin sat on the sofa above him. The lamp burned. The apartment was quiet. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Jaylin said quietly, "You're going to have to explain a lot of things." "I know. And I'm going to ask hard questions." "I know. And I'm not..." Her voice caught slightly, just slightly, the first crack in the steadiness, and she let it be there without fixing it. "I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago, Junho. I built something here. Without you. I need you to understand that." He turned his head and looked up at her, at the honey gold skin and the dark hair loose around her shoulders, and the crescent moon at her throat, and the tired, extraordinary, undefeated face of the woman who had raised his children alone and had done it, by every measure he had been able to observe from a careful distance, with a grace that made him feel the weight of his absence every single day. "I understand that," he said. And he meant it in a way that went further than the words. She looked at him for a long moment. "Noah found you at the mall," she said. "And you told him not to say anything." "I didn't want to put that on him." "You put it on him anyway. He carried it for a week." Junho closed his eyes briefly. "I know. I handled that wrong." "You handle a lot of things wrong." "Yes." "So do I," she said quietly. "I handle things wrong by not handling them at all. I close doors." He said nothing, but he heard it for what it was. Outside, Atlanta continued its indifferent, glittering existence. Somewhere a few streets over, a radio played something slow and unhurried through an open window. The lamp in the corner burned on. The boys breathed in the deep, uncomplicated rhythm of children who have done something they believed in and have been proven right, and who are now resting in the particular peace of that outcome. And in the morning, when the questions would begin in earnest, and the hard conversations would sit down at the kitchen table and demand to be fed, and 2 people would have to decide what rebuilding looked like when the foundation had never actually been destroyed, only abandoned. In the morning, Jaylin would find a message on her phone sent from her own number 3 days ago to a contact saved as a black heart. She would call both boys into the kitchen. She would hold up the phone. She would look at two faces that were hers and his simultaneously. Two faces that had decided, with the full sovereign authority of children who love their parents more than their parents love themselves, to do the thing the adults in the room were too afraid to do. She would open her mouth to say something serious about boundaries and privacy and the appropriate use of other people's telephones. And Noah would point at Eli, and Eli would point at Noah. And the serious thing she was going to say would never arrive, because the laugh came back. That real one, the one from below the armor. And this time, it stayed longer. From the living room, Junho heard it. And for the first time in 37 months, in the quiet of an ordinary Atlanta morning, with the sun coming through windows he had never stood inside before, Kang Junho allowed himself to believe that the thing he had broken might also be the thing that had refused, without his permission, to stay broken. Some doors, it turns out, do not close all the way, no matter how carefully you try to shut them. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever loved someone so completely that you convinced yourself disappearing from their life was the kindest thing you could do, only to realize later that your silence was its own kind of wound? Have you ever been the one left behind, building yourself back up brick by brick, not knowing that the person who left never actually looked away? And have you ever had someone see through every wall you built? Not a therapist, not a best friend, but a child who simply loved you too much to let you keep pretending you were fine. Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about love, silent sacrifice, and the courage it takes to open a door you were afraid to knock on, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.